You are at Sonrisers this morning. I am so glad you are here. We have got a day for you that's going to blow your mind. And I'm just really, really excited. We have Anna Kelley and we got to spend some time together last weekend, which was awesome. Loved it, loved it. And if you were on Sunrisers last week, you also were at Free for All for just a few minutes. And we were really glad to have that live. That was a lot of fun. And it was great to see what can happen if you've got two video professionals in the background with a 90-inch TV and real cameras and everything. It was pretty awesome. Microphones and all. All right. Tom Latimer, my dear friend, are you ready to start rolling?
Yes, ma'am, I am. And as always, good morning, guys. A few weeks ago, I had a doctor's appointment, and the appointment was at 2:30. So I said, well, I'll get there early. I got there about 2:15, and about 2:45, the nurse came out and got me and put me in this little small room. And then I said, well, that's great. I only had to wait 15 additional minutes. And then it was about 15 minutes before the nurse came in. And then after that, it was about 15 minutes before the doctor came in. And he said, I need to see you again. So I waited 20 minutes more for the nurse to come back to give me a new appointment. So I'm sure you've guessed it. It's, the conversation, the topic this morning, is about waiting. And, we all meet new investors, and, we live in a microwave type environment. And, we say to our young investors or people, get an education. And then once they get an education, they look for a career, they look for a home, they look for a car, they look for everything that they believe the American dream, supposed to bring their way. And they go out there and they get a home and a car and maybe even starting a family, and then realize that their funds and their ability cannot survive with where they are and what they have done. And they have gone into this process, too quickly. Or if a family is just raveling, or if your business is taking on water, no one likes to wait. That's something that's in our society. That's not what we want. We want instant gratification. We want any problem to be solved, and if it appears to be solving too slowly, if it appears that we are not recovering fast enough, we need a counselor. We need someone to see or to tell us that where the problem is, because we look for that instant gratification. I want to share with you a story about, and this is going to be about waiting on the Lord. This is the story here. It says, in a kingdom surrounded by lush forests and rolling meadows, there lived a wise and humble farmer named Joran. Known for his dedication and generosity, Joran was a respected figure in his village. His farm was modest but productive, and he had a loving family and loyal friends. Despite his contentment, Joran faced a trial that would test his patience and faith. One year, a harsh drought struck the kingdom. The skies remained clear and unforgiving, and the once fertile soil of Joran's field turned to dust. His crops began to wither, and his family food supply dwindled. The villagers came to Joran for advice, but he too felt the weight of uncertainty. Every morning, Joran would walk through his parched field, lifting his eyes to the heaven, solemnly pleading for rain. The other villagers, seeing his quiet suffering, began to lose hope. Some began to leave, seeking better fortunes elsewhere. Yet Joran remained steadfast, hopeful. His faith in the Lord was unwavering, despite the growing desperation around him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the cracked earth, Joran sat by his small dry well. He prayed earnestly, asking the Lord for relief and guidance. In the stillness of his prayer, he felt a gentle whisper in his heart, urging him to just wait. Days turned into weeks, and the drought continued. Many villagers questioned Joram's patience, suggested he leave and search for greener pastures. Yet Joram remained steadfast, convinced that the Lord would provide in due time. As Joram's faith was tested, he chose to use his remaining resources to help those in need. He shared his dwindling supplies with the needy villagers, and his small act of kindness were a beacon of hope amid the despair. His selflessness inspired others to stay and support one another, despite the harsh condition. One morning, as Joram tended to his field, a stranger appeared at the edge of his land. The stranger was a very weary traveler who had heard of Joram's plight and came to offer help. He carried with him a sacred scroll and shared it with Joram. The scroll contained a message of divine promise, a reminder that those who wait with faith will be rewarded in due time. With renewed hope, Joram took the scroll message to heart. He continued to wait and trust. Despite the ongoing challenges, his faith became a source of strength for the entire village. Then, as if the heavens themselves responded to Joram's unwavering faith, dark clouds began to gather in the sky. The first drop of rain fell gently upon the dry earth, and soon the heavens opened up in a torrential downpour. The land drank deeply of the life-giving rain, and the once barren field began to recover. The village rejoiced, not only because of the return of the rain, but because they had learned a profound lesson through Jordan's steadfastness. They had witnessed the power of waiting on the Lord, understanding that patience and faith could bring about blessings in ways they had not anticipated. Joram's farm flourished once more, and his story became a cherished legend to the kingdom. He continued to live a life of humility and generosity, always remembering the lessons of waiting on the Lord. The village, inspired by Joram's example, learned to trust and hope even in the most challenging of times, knowing that faith and patience could lead them through adversity and into a future filled with promises. You know, God deals with this, the type of waiting, and he deals with it in Samuel, 1 Samuel, the 13th chapter, verse 5 through 14. This is concerning Saul, the first king of Israel. And as we know the backstory, God's people wanted a king, even though God was their theocracy and ruler over them. That wasn't good enough for them. They wanted a king. And so God chose Saul, a man who was a shoulder above the height of all the other men. He had all of the outward appearance of being a king. And so here in the 5th verse, it says, the Israelites were being surrounded by the Philistines. So listen to the story. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmac, east of Beth-aven. When the Israelites saw their situation was critical and their army was hard pressed, they hid in caves and thickets among the rocks and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. And this is Saul. Saul remained in Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel. Well, Samuel was the prophet of God. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, this is Saul. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offering. And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. And this is what Samuel said, what have you done? Saul replied, when I saw the men were scattering, and they did not come, and you did not come at the set time, and the Philistines were assembling in Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal. I have not sought the Lord's favor, so I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering. And this is what Samuel said. You have done a foolish thing, Samuel said. You have not kept the command of your Lord, your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all times. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him to be ruler of this. It just shows, how God has put us here on this earth. And there are certain things that are on God's level and not our level. Our level is to be able to trust him. Our level of ability is to wait on him. And here here's Saul, the first king. And this is what he said. You didn't come. God, you didn't come. You didn't come when you said you were going to come. We waited these 7 days, but you didn't show up on time. And the Philistines were all over us. They were going to destroy us. And I knew we had to offer a sacrifice. I knew a sacrifice had to be given. And because Samuel wasn't here, Lord, I had to take it into my own hands. I had to take that authority to be able to do that. I had to go into your realm. And so I'm saying to me as to you, we all face things in life that are on God's level. And we may pray, and we may have prayed and prayed and prayed. And after all of this praying, nothing materialized. The giants that's in our life, the trouble that's there at our back door, and all of these things may never have left. And so therefore, it's easy for us to say, I need to go farther. I need to do the things that I have given God to do, and I need to take these things and I need to do them myself. As my granddaughter would love to say, Granddaddy, I did it all by myself. And that sounds good when you're tying your shoes and you're putting your clothes on. But I'm here to tell you that in this life, we cannot do it all by ourselves. God did not make us to give us that ability that we can do it all by ourselves. And so in our business, in our family, in our communities, and all of this, sometimes we can grow the business and we can, have all of the skills that God has given us. But in all of this, do we trust him? Do we wait on the Lord? And that's what this Isaiah says. For they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up wings as of eagles. They shall run and not grow weary. These are the qualities when we wait on the Lord. And I know we're in a time, I know we live in a country, political, rate-wise, all of the things that inflow into our business as to vacancies and all of these things. But in all of this, do we have that calmness? Do we have that ability, to just wait on the Lord? And waiting is, I can guarantee you, it's not easy. I love to roll my sleeves up and jump into it myself and always look for a solution. I always tell Dot, I said, sometimes we have problems, but do we ever look for solutions? So everything that comes up, I'm looking for a solution. But everything that comes into life, the solution is not with us, it's with God. So my encouragement in whatever role we're in, whatever is happening in your life, whether it's family, whether or not it's business, whether or not it's friends, wherever it is, there's always going to be a situation that Saul faced, that the Philistines are coming. And if I don't do something quickly, everything is going to go. And so therefore I have to take this into my own hands and do it myself. And Samuel's words to Saul was, you have done wrong. And that this kingdom that God had given you, that could have been yours forever, He has now taken it away from you because you did not wait, you did not trust, and you did not believe that God is able to take care of the issues and the trouble and the cares that we have in this world. So my I guess my advice is for me is to wait on the Lord. Let's pray. Eternal gracious God, Father, you made us, you know us, and you know one thing that we don't know, Father. We know when our end on this earth will come. And we don't have a clue, Father. And the other thing we don't have a clue is when the Father will send his son back to redeem his people. And so, Father, we don't know that either. But while we are here, you tell us to wait on you, to be faithful, to let our light shine. And as Joanne did, to share the things that we have with the people that we come in contact with. And Father, always to believe that there is never a scarcity when it comes to you, that you give us treasures. Father, you abound us with all of the things that we need, and you give it to us that we can glorify you and share it with those we come in contact with. So Father, this morning we just praise you. We just lift you up. And Father, give us patience. Give us that ability to wait and to trust on you. We praise you in your son's name. Amen.
Amen. Woo, I got to get this dagger out of the middle of my chest. Patience is so challenging. It's especially with all these entrepreneurial personalities. Patience is not a virtue. It's
And
it's gosh, that's hard to do.
amen. Amen. But when it's, we come together on these Fridays and, we see a microcosm of each person. We just see the tip of the iceberg. But as we go lower, we all have trials. We all have tribulations. And even if we believe we are protected, our family, our children, our loved ones, they may not be as strong, and Satan will attack them. And when they attack them, it's like God, he's attacking us. And so he can get to us through others. And so the peace that we have is something that we have to share with our loved ones, that whatever you think the world has taken, God can give it back to you, but he will do it in his time, not on your timetable.
Mm. I know you didn't plan it this way, but on the YouVersion Bible app this morning, the verse is Psalms 27:14. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and take heart, and wait for the Lord. When I opened it up this morning, I said, "Yep, you're talking right to me." And then you say this. So okay, what's the difference of being patient and waiting for the Lord and procrastination and feeling like you're not doing your part?
Well, I guess all of this you put it together, could probably make a great cake, with all those ingredients that you just named. And I have to say it for me, because I'm not an authority on this process, is, procrastination and all of this. God's people have always been, I mean, they're busy. It's always one where, what Paul says, you know, I press on toward the mark that's before me. And so procrastination is not something I see as a God-given ability.
Mm.
Even this story about Joram, while he couldn't do anything, he couldn't plant a crop, he was praying. While he couldn't plant a crop and his farm was dry, he shared his resources with others. Just sitting and doing nothing and just expectation. That's not a quality of a characteristic of God's people. And so waiting means in prayer. Waiting means, in preparation. It's one where we are preparing and waiting on God. It's not one where we are asleep and say, well, he'll take care of it whenever he wants to. We are vigilant. That's what Jesus had told his disciples. Could you not wait? Could you not wait 1 hour with
Mm,
me in prayer?
mm,
Just wait 1 hour. So the prayer life is consistent. We never stop doing that. We never stop. We should never stop growing, spiritually. Uh, Outside, we may not be doing things. Someone may see us as not accomplishing anything, but our internal life, and that's what Paul says. He said the outer body decays, but the inner spirit renews each day. The flesh is getting older. We won't see as much. We won't hear as often. We won't walk as far. But Paul says the inner person, that inner soul and spirit continues to grow. Each day we should have a greater growth inwardly than we would ever have outwardly.
mm, mm. Alyssa has her hand up. Go ahead, Alyssa.
It brings to mind this phrase I heard in prayer once, how to silence communicate with noise. And I feel like as entrepreneurs, business owners, we are constantly in that doing nature of our lives. And just like Tom said, having that time and devotion to being in prayer and receptivity, not just asking, but sitting and also listening for that silent whisper in the reading today, it's difficult to listen to if you're listening for loud things, if you're always listening for the next action step, the next item on your to-do list. And I feel like listening through silence and like receiving the word from that place of receptivity is part of the mix of how you can judge for yourself what is procrastination and what is truly waiting.
I
Oh,
love
I
it.
love your background.
It's real too. It's
Wow.
not fake.
I'm saying that is beautiful. Wow. I don't know where you are, but hey, that's a picture behind you. I love that.
So I have a really good friend, and many of you know Paul Olson. He's on here a lot. Um, he is probably the epitome of patience and waiting on God. I've known him for 12, 13 years and watched him over and over and over again. I mean, I've said to him, Paul, what are you doing? Why are you waiting like this? Why are you not making this decision? Why are you? And he just, well, God's telling me to do this. God's telling me to do that. And I mean, and several times I've thought to myself, this guy's nuts, but now 12, 13 years later, it is amazing where he is in his life and how he just follows exactly what God is directing him to do. And he is just in the word listening. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
When the one great thing about that is, what Paul said. He said, whatever state I am in, I have contentment. Whether I like something, I'm contented. Whether I have great things, I'm contented. And I think that's something that we just need to learn in ourselves, because every day will not be the same, whether it's financially, business, whatever. But if we can gain and acquire contentment in that state that we're in, then we are okay, because we know that God loves us, and if we are in that state for this day or this season, we're in there for a reason. He loves us, and he's growing us, and he's providing for us, but he's also teaching us
Mm,
how he wants us to become better servants for him.
mm, mm. I love it. Thank you, Tom.
You're
This has
welcome.
been great. Really awesome. Thank you so much. Bryan Maddex, I see you. I'm going to change your view. Did you get the text I sent you earlier today too?
No, I didn't. Man, what did you tell me?
We want to keep it, try to be done. You got 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Oh, goodness.
But read the text too, because I sent you another one too about doing a future entire segment on everything you're sharing with us.
Okay.
So,
Well, let me hop right to it because somebody told me I have no time. Screen to share. Very fast. Okay, jobless claims came up a little bit. That is not a ton of an increase in jobless claims. It'll be interesting to see what the Fed does. Everybody's kind of pegging a quarter point. Continued jobless claims are up a little bit to 1.85 million. That's about the highest we've seen since November 21, not changed. 10-year treasury and the 2-year treasury. This is the yield curve. So we take the 10-year treasury, we subtract the 2-year, and we see, are we positive or negative? Gray bars are recessions, and you can see the yield curve goes under 0, so it inverts. And then most recessions, sometimes it reverts during the recession, these 2 years in the 80s. But every time we've seen the yield curve invert back to normal, we see a recession following. We just reverted back and we are at a 0.04. So we're a positive yield curve, which means long-term rates are now paying more than short-term rates. That is a recession indicator. It typically happens right before a recession. The Fed futures, there is a 57% chance right now we're going to see a quarter point cut, a 43% chance we're going to see a half point cut. Now, when we look at rate cuts, typically we see the 10-year fall 1.4% from its peak from the first cut. And then historically, we also see the 10-year fall 1.5% from the first cut to the low. So we think that we could see the 10-year treasury go down to the 1.3, 2.2% mark. The 10-year treasury and 30-year mortgage rates normally have about a 1.5% spread between them. So this is going to look at just the spread. 1.5% is very average, 1.5 to 2%. You can see that we spiked way up in 2022 because we needed to entice investors to do long-term bonds because of inflation. Freddie Mac, average interest rates 6.2%. Mortgage projections, everybody's still thinking end of next year, we're going to be right around 5.98. That's the average. If you notice first quarter, everybody thinks we might go up from where we are right now. So we could see some turbulence. Down is never a straight line. I'm going to skip home equity. This is the housing sale to list price. So if you're selling up north, you're selling on average above list price. If you're selling in Florida, on average, you're dropping 5% your contract from that current list price once it sells. So this is just an interesting chart to see what the economy is doing with sales, actual sales data. And then I pulled up interest rates for a client this morning, and 2.65% cash out refinance with the 700 credit score. No prepayment penalty, 2.6.375. I have an investor on a DSCR loan. No 0.7375, 1.6875. That's with this investor, 65% loan to value cash out.
amazing.
And if we just look at the bond market, this is mortgage-backed securities. When this goes up, rates get better. So you can see rates have been getting better since April, and it has been a fantastic ride up on the 10-year treasury. When this chart slides down, mortgage rates are getting better, and you can see again the 10-year treasury has just been on a nice slope. So we're hitting some resistance right now, but we're at about an 18-month low in mortgage rates. The average rate out there is 6.2%. That's normally with 1 point origination fee. This is the Freddie Mac. There is my mortgage minute, and I don't know how many minutes, but hopefully not too many.
You did perfect, my friend.
All right.
That was beautiful.
I guess I need to watch my texts. I'm in like the zone in my putting data together, and I did not see your text, so I will read.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I do want you to do, I would love for you to do an entire show where you're going into detail of all the stuff you do, because it's so interesting. And I mean, I just get a ton of comments about how much people really love what you share. So I think getting into more depth would be even better. That would be great. I wish we had like 4 hours. That would be nice. Unfortunately, we all have to work, don't we?
Man, that work thing, it gets in the way sometimes. But if you enjoy what you do, then you get to work, right? You get to
That's
enjoy.
right. I always say that work and family, if I could get rid of having to deal with both of those things, I'd be perfect.
Good luck with that, Wendy. And be
Yeah.
careful what you wish for.
People think when their kids grow up, they're gonna have more free time. Forget about it, folks. It doesn't work
Every
that way.
stage is a new and creative way of how you don't have time. Like, wait, I thought this was when I was gonna have that time.
That's right. That's right. Give us a quick Chase update.
Chase is back to school. First week, back to school. He's going half days. He's going in at 11:30. Yesterday was the first day he said, I like art. So every day we say, how is school? No. And he says, I'm busy. He touches his port in his chest. He said, I'm busy. I can't go to school. But he's now saying that he likes art. Baby steps, baby
That's
steps. So
awesome.
it's great to see him kind of getting back into some normal. He does a chemo every Monday, and it kind of Tuesdays and Wednesdays, it kind of leaves him not feeling great. So hopefully as we continue, that will subside because his body is just getting stronger and stronger. But Chase is doing amazing. He wasn't supposed to go back to school till November or December. So he just continues to impress with his ability to bounce back. And he's an amazing kid. Thank you for asking.
That's awesome. Praise
God's
God.
good.
That is awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. Great. Thank you for what you're sharing. We really appreciate it. All right. Here's the we're at the big time, y'all. Last week on at Free for All, Anna Kelley got up and did a presentation, and by the end of it, everybody's hair was pushed back away from their head like they'd had, those Bose speakers, that commercial where the sound just blasts you. And it's not her sound, it's what she says and what she shares. This woman continues to blow my mind every time I get in front of her. Plus, she's fun. I love that. Anna, I am so honored and so glad that you agreed to come and do that presentation with us. Are you ready?
I'm ready. I told Wendy at the event, I need to spend more time with her because she tells me I'm so smart. And I've got kids telling me, Mom, you don't know anything because you're old. So I'm like, I like to be around older people that can see at least a little bit of intelligence when sometimes the younger people think, Google's smarter than their parents are. So
Okay, I'll try not to be offended that you called me older, but
no,
reality.
I'm older. Hey, we're older than my 15 and 13-year-old, right? So it's all in perspective. But I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to have finally got to meet several of you in person. That was really a blessing to me. And I'm glad that some of y'all came back for more. Sometimes when I talk about data instead of the fun thing, I think people are gonna, glaze over and tune out. But the reason I love to look at data is because we have so much noise in the world. And depending on the news channel you turn on, the data is spun in a biased way. And I've looked at it, right? All the headline news tell you something totally different about where are we and where are we in the economy. And just real briefly, I shared at the event, the reason that I became a student of economics is because I thought I knew a whole lot because I was in private banking and I told people how to manage their investments. And then I worked at AIG, and we were all blindsided by 2009, completely blindsided. Because the economy, the news kept saying the economy's fine. There's no risk, right? It's just mortgages. And then after a recession started, which wasn't declared backdated for a year and a half, we had suddenly everybody was surprised. So I learned that we have to understand data. And Tom, I loved every time you speak, it speaks to me. And I loved what you said. I think Samuel, it's not that he didn't love God or want to do the right thing. It was that he was impatient. And sometimes as Christians, I've made, I've prayed and always tried to do the right thing and prayed, that the Lord would bless us and that we'd be living for him. But I look back and I made a lot of really poor decisions, impatient decisions, because even though my desire was good, such as I want to stay home with my kids. So I need to push my husband to start a business. We need to go into debt. We need to do whatever we need to do because I want to be home with my kids. And I made, in hindsight, some very poor decisions about those things. Even though my heart was to honor the Lord, because I was impatient. And so, Tom, I love that you said that. And the last year and a half, I'll just say this real quick, has been really stretching for me in that area. You know, I fell and broke my ankle and ruined my tendon, and I couldn't walk really without pain until August. So 16 months of waiting on the Lord. And it's interesting, Tom, you shared that scripture about, you know, waiting on the Lord, and he will renew our strength and mount us up on wings like eagles, and we will run and not grow weary and not faint. And that is the scripture the Lord brought to my mind and just kept flooding over me as I was laying in pain with my ankle broken. Like, I just need to trust him and wait. But little did I know the economy would also stagnate, and my business, I wasn't buying deals. I've been crazy busy for 5 years, and all of a sudden I'm like, I feel like I'm twiddling my thumbs because I'm sitting here injured, can't move, can't fly to Dallas and do my development stuff, and rates were going up. And I'm like, Lord, what are you doing? But the thing that I've learned is to pray for wisdom and to pray, Lord, don't let me do something that is not within your will, that it's going to cause harm to me or my family or my investors. Give me the wisdom to know. And if I take action and it's not within your will and not your best, please slam the door in my face. And I literally pray about that for every big decision now, every deal that I do. Give me wisdom and don't let me do something stupid. And God is faithful to do that. So in my, you know, that is
Anna,
really, yeah.
how did you handle that mentally? Because that happens to a lot of people. You'll get injured, you'll be out, you'll be, and you're, because you really were, you were confined for a long time. And
Yeah.
and you had to gradually, like, it took a lot to get you back into the swing of things. And you have all these things that you're trying to do at the same time. How did you handle that mentally?
You know, honestly, Wendy, by the grace of God, truly. I mean, trust me, I had days where I'm just boohoo crying, like, and I don't let myself, you know, this is just part of, I've had a lot of challenges in my life from a young age, and God has always given me the grace since I was 6 years old and saved to know God's got me. I'm going to be okay. And that grace of knowing I can trust in the Lord, and he's always been faithful to work everything out for my best and his glory. Anytime I start to feel like it's hopeless or this really stinks or I don't like it, you know, of course I tell the Lord, but I say, I trust you, you know, help me to have faith of a mustard seed when I'm sad. And, you know, my stepmom always says in Texas, you know, you can cry, but when you get down in the mud, you don't wallow in it. You got to get back up and get back on the horse, like, quickly. And so I've just learned, let myself cry, let myself grieve what I thought, you know, what is happening that I didn't think should. And then I just pick myself up, and I don't let myself go there mentally too long. I just have learned God is faithful and bigger than the storms and bigger than my feelings. And that has helped me. But when you're busy, it's easier to put those things aside and go, okay, I got this next thing to tackle and the next thing to tackle. When you're sitting and you can't move and you depend on people to help you, you know, do everything, it's hard because you're sitting there with your thoughts and your emotions for a lot longer without busy things to distract you. So I spent a lot more time in prayer, a lot more time in God's word, and just had to wait on him. And during that time, I mean, for those of you that know me, I mean, I had 3 kids with concussions, 3 accidents, my ankle, my daughter struggling with some anxiety, getting ready for college, and just a lot of stuff. Our, you know, investors being challenged because of our properties and the economy. It was very hard. And I just had to say, Lord, help me day by day, give me wisdom, and help me to just trust you. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't do anything for a long time other than just pour into my kids, say, I'm not going to take on anything else just because I can. I don't need to be a superhero. Just let myself be. And so I spent a lot of time this last year and a half just being, but also making intentions to be there for my kids even more and to pray even more and to look at the data and be really patient and pray that the Lord gives me wisdom on focusing on what I do have today, not on necessarily new growth and new deals all the time, and doing the right thing by my investors while I just had to wait for him to change, change things, bring the rain, for example. So that's how I've dealt with it. Not perfectly, but God's definitely given me strength and grace through this time.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Okay, so how do we shift from that to data? Really, data, it's important that you don't drown it out, because when we pray for wisdom, when we pray, the way we are patient is we have to know where we are and why we need to be patient and what's coming. And so I always look at data, and my hope is that when I get through all of this, and I will try to go fast, like Bryan, I mean, he showed it can be done, and I'm long-winded, as you know. So I'm gonna skip some data, but I'm gonna hit the main points, and I want you to absorb the main points, because when we have wisdom to know where are we really, what could happen, and hopeful that the things that we want to happen will, it helps us to wait more patiently on the Lord until we see, that sprinkles start to come, the storm clouds starting to move. Because if we move and make the wrong decisions without knowing the reality of where we are, we can make some really poor decisions, just like Samuel did. So that's my hope in sharing all of this, not because we know the future, but because we know some possibilities that can happen. We can prepare for that, and then we can pray for the Lord to give us wisdom and protect us from ourselves making the wrong decisions too quickly. So I'm going to share my screen and do my very best to get through this quickly. Let me just make sure y'all can see me. Bryan, one of these days, I want to know how you put your face in that screen, so you can have your screen and your face there too, because sometimes people don't like to just see the screen. But we're going to talk about where we are as of today, the state of the economy and investing, and help you hopefully make some heads or tails of what you're hearing in the media, because it can be very, very confusing. Quick little disclaimer.
Can you go ahead and hit start slideshow? It'll make it bigger.
Start slideshow. Yes, I've not done that. See, you're more technically unchallenged than I am. Slideshow.
Hit the far left button that says from beginning. It's got like a little, there you go.
Oh, look at y'all. I learn something new every day. Okay. Quick disclaimer. I am not licensed. I'm not a securities license. I'm not a financial advisor, a CFP, a CPA. Anything I tell you is my opinion based on my history, my experience, but it is my opinion. Well, the data is the data. My opinions, because I'm a human, could be biased, but the data is the data. If you make investment decisions, you will hold me harmless, and you will not sue me or my businesses. You're going to talk to your own advisor, your own accountant, your own CPA before you make decisions based on this information. Okay, y'all know enough about me. I always start with this slide because it's important that people understand it. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but it's important to understand, to know where we are and why these things matter, why these data points matter. What is an economic cycle, right? Essentially, the economy always goes in cycles. We have a expansion period where the economy is really growing, GDP is up, people are doing well, asset values are going up, people have jobs, and usually rates are held low to continue to stimulate the economy until it overheats and hits a peak. When it hits a peak, a lot of times you start to have inflation. People start to raise prices of things to keep up with all the demand. And at the peak, consumer confidence is high, and everybody thinks it's always going to stay that high and it's never going to come back down again. But eventually, sometimes some sectors start to contract a little bit. And at the peak is when the Fed starts to say, we need to cool things off, cool off the inflation. They raise rates to slow down the economy so that it doesn't get too overinflated. And that starts to bring a contraction. And during the contraction, you just start to go the other way. And GDP starts to decrease. People start to pull back because of inflation, because of worrying about layoffs that are starting to come, and their confidence it starts to decline as they start to struggle financially. And during the beginning of contraction, a lot of times rates are held flat or high. Does that sound familiar? Like what we've just been through? And again, they're trying to hold them high long enough or flat long enough to get us out of inflation, but to prevent the bottom, the trough of a contraction, which is a recession. And at the contraction period, credit starts to tighten, defaults start to rise, and that can last a while like it has. Eventually, when GDP goes to the lowest level, you have high unemployment, low investment, you start to see bankruptcies and foreclosures, consumer confidence falls, then rates generally are dropped to a very, very low level to get us out of that recession as quickly as possible so that you don't go into a depression. And then even though rates start to fall, because the government wants us to stimulate the economy again and get it to recovery, credit starts to get very, very tight as people recognize we're in a recession. That's the point when you start to see big layoffs, unemployment really going high, and everybody's scared. And that's really the important part, is that this is the maximum point of opportunity for investors. It's a lot of risk, but it's a maximum point of opportunity. So when you hear recession, and I say, hey, I think we're heading into a recession or we're there, it doesn't mean the world is over. Recessions generally last about 10 months. There's a range, right, from 8 to about 18 to 24 months. And so this is a short period in time in the grand scheme of things if the government is successful in getting us out of it. So that's just something that's really important to kind of understand overall. Along with that, real estate goes in cycles. And I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but if y'all want to take a screenshot, this would be a good one to do that for. Essentially, real estate goes in very similar cycles, but they're not always one-on-one. And in fact, real estate usually leads the economy because it funds and supports so much of the economy. For example, I buy a house, I put contractors to work, I put mortgage people to work, I put banks to work. You know, there's all kinds of people that are impacted, landscapers, et cetera, by real estate. And so oftentimes real estate starts to struggle before you're technically in a contraction or a recession in the rest of the world. So we have been, in case you all haven't noticed, in a real estate recession, even though technically the economy hasn't officially gone into recession. So real estate usually leads, and when we're going to come out of a recession, real estate is usually the first to bounce back before the rest of the economy does. So generally speaking, during a recession, demand plummets. You don't see a lot of purchases because people can't get credit, but prices bottom. Then they start to recover. At the bottom and in a recovery is the time you're going to get your best prices, the lowest prices. And because rates are low, because the Fed's trying to stimulate, it's also the time that you're going to be able to have lower rates. It's a great time to lock in those 30-year fixed rates and to buy properties that you can hold that are going to do well during that recession and recovery. But ultimately, in the long term, they're going to continue to go up in value, even though you know that during that recession and recovery, you might have higher vacancies, you might have some struggles. You have to have a long-term perspective in what you buy during that phase, and then ride it back up to the top. So once you start expanding in the economy again, it's, you know, prices are still going to start going up because the economy is rising, asset values are going to go up. Your rates are still relatively low until you're clearly in an expansion for a while. And one thing to note is recoveries usually last about 2 to 3 years. So 10 months of a recession, 2 to 3 years of a recovery. It takes patience. It's not just going to bounce back. It doesn't usually just bounce back right away. And then during the expansion, you still have somewhat low interest rates, a lot of overconstruction, and usually that leads to a point of hyper supply. Too many builders at the area, more housing units available than there are people that want to rent them. And because of that, values generally start to supply as you start to contract, just as the economy is starting to contract. So if you can time it, you sell high, you sell at the peak or close to the peak, and then you want to buy a stable asset that's going to weather a recession. So the phase that you're in really impacts a lot of your success. We all want to think we're rock stars when our values skyrocket, during the expansion and then hit a peak. And then people wonder what happened and why am I losing everything when they, don't see that there's a contraction coming. Or it becomes harder to be a real estate investor when you're on the right side of the screen, stage 3 or 4, and people just wonder why and what happened. So again, we can give ourselves credit for making good decisions by kind of knowing generally which quadrant we're in. But if we're not aware of where things are going, we can quickly realize that, we're not necessarily as smart as we thought, but the economy was helping us out, right? So the cycle that you're in really impacts supply and demand for properties, the ease and flexibility of credit, and really the best strategies for profitability. You only want to really value add houses and apartment buildings for the most part when you're in recovery and expansion, maybe the top of oversupply. And then you really should be switching to a buy and hold strategy during that, the downturn. Because if you're hoping that values go up when you flip that property or that apartment building, and you're in an environment that's dragging down values and prices and bringing up, vacancy, you could really, really get hurt. So the other thing is large real estate cycles tend to change about every 18 years, and we're somewhere between the 15 and 17-year mark when you compare the last expansion to the most recent, the last peak to the most recent, et cetera. The other thing that's really important to understand, and I hope that this really clarifies a lot of the confusion and the noise when you hear we're in a recession, we're not in a recession, we're at risk of a recession or not, we're not at risk of a recession. There are different indicators that economists look at to determine whether we're in a recession. And those indicators hit recessionary territory or expansionary territory at different times. The other thing is sometimes economists are looking at longer term and sometimes they're looking at shorter term outcomes. So there's secular trends and cyclical trends. These recessions and expansions are part of the cycle. They're cyclical trends. And that means they're kind of the state of the economy over the next 6 to 18 months or over the last 6 to 18 months. Where secularly means longer term, it's what do we expect to happen over the next 3 to 5 years. So for example, we have been on a U.S. secular decline over 40 years. Our prices and our growth and our GDP have actually been on a long decline as demographics continue to slow, as people have less kids, as less people enter the workforce compared to the people exiting the workforce, et cetera. However, we currently have an inflationary environment that is a cycle that may or may not continue. And so that's really important. The other thing is if you look at the graph on the top right, you'll see 3 different squiggly lines. The first one is longer leading indicators. The second is shorter leading indicators. And the third is coincident indicators. And the longer leading indicators are the things that start first. So for example, housing, like I said, starts to expand or contract before the rest of the economy. Monetary policy, what the Fed does generally is supposed to tell you, it's a leading indicator. This is where the Fed thinks things are going. So if the Fed starts to raise interest rates, it's because they're afraid that inflation is going to get a lot worse. Sometimes they're behind the 8 ball as they have been. And if they start cutting rates, it's a sign that they say there is more weakening. We have a recession at risk, even though we don't want to tell you that. And therefore we're going to cut. And so it's a leading indicator telling you that softening is probably coming no matter what they say. The yield curve, it goes recessionary first. It's been recessionary for over 2 years, right? So housing, monetary policy, yield curve, they've all been in recession territory. The shorter leading indicators is then after that, what follows next in the shorter term before a technical recession, for example, labor starts to soften, manufacturing starts to soften, trucking starts to soften. We've seen all those things happen already, and they are in recessionary territory. So if you're talking to someone that's focused on trucking or manufacturing or housing or employment, they're going to go, uh-oh, we're in a recession. And other people are going to go, no, we're not, because GDP is still high, right? So what happens is coincident real-time indicators are those things that are closest to real time. And the National Bureau of Economic Research that dates recession looks at these things to declare whether we're in a recession. The thing is, if we haven't noticed, a lot of these data are based on surveys. They're not real-time data, and therefore they're subject to many revisions. And oftentimes the NBER does not declare a recession until at least 6 months after it started, as they wait for data to catch up and be revised. So sometimes they don't even tell you we were in a recession till we're almost already out of it. But those things that are real-time indicators are employment, payroll, sales, industrial production, and personal consumption. Okay. So it's important to understand, just because some numbers are recessionary and others are not yet, you have to look at where is the curve going to see where are we heading in the next 6 to 18 months. I hope that part is really important to understand. So the key economic indicators that are like headline numbers that everybody's waiting with bated breath, every single number to say, are we going to be in a recession or not? Our GDP, that's the national growth, it's our sales nationally. CPI, Consumer Price Index, or PCE, personal consumption expenditures, those are our measures of inflation. And then employment, the level in wages. And what we need to understand again is employment is always the last shoe to drop. It's the thing that usually unemployment is actually at its very lowest until the recession. And once it starts to tick down into recessionary territory, and it's not until the first Fed rate cut that says, uh-oh, a recession is probably really here, that you start to see big layoffs, okay? So that's important as well. Other factors, there's a lot of other factors that the US looks at to determine whether we're in a recession, but that's the most important thing that you can understand. We all know where we've been. We had a huge expansion period, the longest since Abraham Lincoln was in office. So I wasn't alive that long, but you know, that's what I'm told. So during that time, everybody has had it relatively easy, and real estate investors have all looked like a rock star. During, post-COVID, we had massive amounts of congressional stimulus, fiscal policy, and monetary stimulus, meaning, low interest rates. At this time, we had low rates, but that stimulated more growth to keep us out of, or get us out of the COVID recession. But it also resulted in significant inflation. So obviously, we had companies hoard workers, wages grew, supply chains were disruptive, multiple wars that are still ongoing, and all of these things really stoked massive inflation and asset price inflation and record corporate profits. All those things are starting to weaken, and commercial real estate, for example, is down 30 to 40% in values. And certain markets like Dallas for apartment sales are down 90%. So you see that there's a big softening in real estate, and there's much more to follow. The biggest issue right now in our economy is that 66 to 70% of US households, depending on the survey, say that they are literally living check to check. And as of last month, 50% of American households say they have less than $500 saved with maxed out credit cards. And so it's important to understand that the consumer is stretched because most of our inflation and growth is based upon consumer spending. So if the consumer is stretched, and as of now, our cost of living is at over 25%, excluding food, and we all know that that's expensive as well. People are really, really struggling. And so you have to ask yourself, are they going to allow us to have a soft landing where we miss a recession and we're just going to go right back to big growth? Or are the consumers so stretched that the likelihood is that we're going to continue down that recessionary territory? So now inflation is getting closer to the 2% target that the Fed has. The Congressional Budget Office, I've actually dug in and looked at all of their published meeting minutes that the news never shows you. The Congressional Budget Office believes that we will get to 2% in 2026. So it's going to take a while to get there. The Federal Open Markets Committee of the Fed thinks we'll be to 2.1 to 2.2 by next year. And they both believe that we will have 2% inflation over 2026 to 2034. The reason that's important is that we need to expect that over the next decade or so, inflation may be around that 2% mark. And the reason they don't want it to be more than 2%, this is what they don't tell you, is because it's going to be very difficult to keep GDP at 3% or higher. In order to have a growing economy, they need about that 1% gap between inflation and GDP. Okay. Otherwise, you have stagflation. So, a couple of things you might want to take a screenshot of this as well, because it kind of helps to make heads or tail of where we think are going. But PCE is essentially made up of 13% housing. So the housing inflation is higher than most sectors of the economy, and it'll continue to be. The numbers are somewhat manipulated. They're not exactly accurate. They're calculated, the owner's equivalent rent. But as insurance costs go up, as taxes go up, as energy prices potentially go up, we're going to have to continue to raise rents in order to keep up, and that can keep the inflation numbers a little bit higher. But PCE came down to 2.5% in July and 2.6% in August as of yesterday's updated numbers. CPI, which does not include food or energy, was at 2.9% in July, and it actually came down to its lowest level of 2.5% yesterday for the prior month. And again, when we say it came down to, doesn't mean inflation is falling. It means that the increase in inflation this year compared to last year is only up another 2.5%. So cumulatively, if inflation is still growing at 2, inflation is still growing. This is a really important number. Trueflation, if y'all haven't heard from it, is a real-time indicator, independent data not published by the government that shows you where is the US inflation today if it were calculated the same way that it has been historically, and it's a more accurate measure of where inflation is, and it's today at 1.06%. So it's much, much lower, which could indicate that inflation will continue to come down further. PPI is a number that's producer price index, and that is how much are those that produce goods and services, how much are their costs going up? And if it goes up, it could be that they pass through those prices to the consumer, and consumer inflation goes up. It actually ticked up yesterday to 3.9%, which tells us we're not out of the woods. Inflation isn't completely gone. It could continue to bounce back, and that could be what keeps the Fed from cutting 50 basis points this month instead of, and keep them cutting only 25. So these numbers take a while to come through the economy, and we just have to wait till they all kind of point in the same direction. GDP is about 3%, but it is skewed, and this is really important to understand. I'll go through this in more detail, but GDP, the government needs it to stay positive. If it falls 2 quarters, generally a recession is declared. That's already happened at the end of 2022, and they didn't declare a recession. But when the government starts to see that the economy is on the verge of recession, what do? They hire more government jobs. They spend a lot more money on projects because it's a way to push money into the system to just barely keep it up. And if you look at the end of 2023 and early 2024, we had these great, exciting GDP numbers. When you look at the components, which you can get by going into different sources, you'll see that almost everything was recessionary with 2 exceptions: government spending and healthcare spending, and government jobs and healthcare jobs. And when the government and healthcare jobs make up more than 10% of new jobs in the economy, it always indicates a recession. At the beginning of this year, government jobs alone made up 25% of the new full-time jobs, which is a deeply recessionary indicator. So just because you see good GDP and a little bit lower inflation, it does not mean that the overall economy is healthy. It means that it's just being propped up just enough to not technically be in a recession. We'll talk about GDI a little bit later. And then unemployment is the big one. And unemployment, again, is what everybody's looking at. It is in recessionary territory, even though the overall unemployment rate is low. When you have an uptick of unemployment month over month and quarter over quarter that exceeds 0.3 to 0.5% for that 3-month period, it has always indicated a recession, just like the negative yield curve has. So we did see more jobless claims in August, but what's important is the continued claims for unemployment continued to rise last month, and they're up to 1.85%. And remember, that only starts happening just before the recession. And usually once rates are cut, that's when you start to see a lot of unemployment. So what is very, very clear is we are past the expansion, we're past the peak, and the economy is on a contracting path overall, which means we now have more what's called headwinds that as investors, we're going to be pushing up against in our success as investors versus the last 10 years. We've had a lot of tailwinds that have made everything easier, even if we've made mistakes. Okay. What I want to say here is that I believe we are in a recession. It has not been declared, but most of the data shows us that we are there. I think they will backdate potentially a recession to the very end of 2023 when all is said and done because of all these things that we're talking about. However, they may not. What is clear is that we're in something kind of like a silent recession or a rolling recession. So even if the economy is not as a whole in a technical recession, when 66 to 70% of your households are living check to check and they've tapped out their debt, they are struggling. When their cost of living is up 25% over the last 4 years, they are struggling. And that is going to keep people from spending on anything discretionary. So if you're in businesses that offer things people like, but not what they need, your businesses are likely to start struggling. If you're offering housing, it's a human need, you're probably going to do fine because most people need a place to live. You have this rolling recession, which means certain sectors are in a recession, like manufacturing and housing, that are clearly technically in a recession. And you have other sectors like healthcare and some tech that are not yet in a recession. And so it's not so black and white. It doesn't matter to us investors, are we technically in a recession or not? It doesn't matter if we get the timing perfectly right. What we need to understand is that we're contracting and a lot of people are in a recession. They're having a personal recession, and that's going to impact your vacancies, how often and quickly people are paying, what people can pay for a house, whether they can even get the credit to pay for a house. If all they have in savings is $5,500, their check to check and their credit is maxed out, they may not even be able to qualify for a mortgage, even if they want a house. So are we in a recession? Again, I believe that we are. Technically, it hasn't been declared. Here are the big factors that determine whether we're in a recession. So very quickly, we've talked about the stretched consumer. Feel free to take screenshots of any of this information because I'm not going to go through all of it. But our US savings is also down to 3.6% for consumers. Historically, the average savings per household has been 8.7% from 1959 to 2024. So savings is down significantly, even for those people that have more than $500. Credit and auto defaults are really starting to rise. Evictions are really starting to rise. And there is a backlog of months in big cities to get people out. So they haven't even hit the books yet in the technical data. And we have very large wealth and income gaps. So the spending is very bifurcated. And that means the wealthy are still spending a lot and just enough to keep services CPI up, to keep the economy humming in certain sectors. But a lot of young people, a lot of lower income earners, they are completely tapped out. And again, when 68% of our growth is driven by consumer spendings, you have to ask, if consumers are stretched now, do we have enough to keep us humming and keep us in an expansion and keep us out of a recession? And I think the answer is no. Unemployment and wages. Again, we've triggered the SOM rule. We've been technically in a recession according to these measures since February or August of this year. Jobs have been overstated by the government because people don't understand that the estimates of jobs created are based on surveys of corporations, and the response rate of surveys has been as low as 40% a lot of the last year. So they're not even responding to the government's requests for data. So when the actual payroll data comes in through the states and through ADP, They continually to downward revise how many jobs were created. And out of the 1,818,000 overstated jobs that we had over the last year, based on the last revision, there were actually no net full-time jobs in the country. They were all people taking multiple part-time jobs, meaning there were more job layoffs than there were new jobs created. That's always been recessionary. We talked about government jobs. This is really important because I just saw an article yesterday, I think it was on Wolf Street, that said layoffs and corporate bankruptcies are still very low. So the unemployment, the good news is it's not from layoffs. The reality is corporate layoffs and corporate bankruptcies this year are the highest since 2009. I just saw today Verizon's laying off another 5,000 people. Goldman Sachs has had layoffs. Many companies are going under. Big Lots, right? People that usually sell cheap stuff to people, they're going under. And so there's more to it than the headlines. The other thing is the Congressional Budget Office estimates that unemployment will grow to up to 5.4% through 2027. So while they're telling you we're not at risk of a recession, their own congressional data that's helping them make decisions says we are. Okay. We have the fewest job openings since 2021. Real wage growth is weak at 1.5%. And that's not very good when inflation is up, cost of living is up 25%. The other thing that's important to know, and this is not a political statement, so please don't take it this way. We have 6 million immigrants that have come into the country in the last 2 years, some legally, some illegally. I'm all for legal immigration, okay? But the reality is the data is showing us that of the 1.3 million jobs that were supposedly created over the last year, 1.6 million of those went to illegal undocumented migrants. So we had a growth of 1.3. We had 1.6 go to undocumented migrants, means that US citizens' jobs actually were lost 300,000 over the last year again. So again, I'm for migration. And the reason the government is allowing stuff to come over the border, again, I don't want this to sound political because I don't like either side right now. I'm just going to be real honest with you. So all of you can be mad at me, right? But the reality is this. The reason the government is allowing immigration is because they're relying on immigration to get more people here to spend money to keep our growth going in the face of declining demographics where people are not having enough kids to work and be able to fund just Medicare and Social Security over the next 5 years. And so that's why they're allowing it.
Anna, there's
Yeah.
a question. Wes Browning has a question. Wes, do you want to ask real quick?
Yeah, thanks for the analysis. It's not very rosy, but what I'm hearing otherwise is, and I don't even see it reflected here, and please help me understand, how is the skyrocketing deficit that doesn't seem to be, I don't see how we recover from it, affect this analysis?
I'm going to get there. So be patient with me and let me go through this. And then I promise I'll get to that because it's really important. It's really important. So I will say this, the skyrocketing deficit is one of those secular trends. It's what we have to worry about happening in the next 3 to 5 years, right? Not what happens in the next 6 to 12. It's not going to have an immediate impact on whether we're in a recession or not, but it will absolutely impact whether we have a lot more inflation in the future, despite growth being slower. And so we'll get there. But at a high level, it's going to have a huge impact. And I believe that after we're through a recession, when inflation falls and rates fall, that we very well could have a lot more inflation as a secular trend than what we've seen before. And that inflation will go back up and that rates will have to go back up. But there's a lot of other things pulling from that. So we'll get there. But the thing on migration is we do need more people to fund our unfunded promised liabilities of Social Security and Medicare. And that's why the government is allowing immigration. The key to me is that we need Congress to agree that if we've allowed them to be here, we need to come out, bipartisan some way to make sure that if we're letting them have jobs, they need to be taxed, because unless they're being taxed, we don't have enough tax revenue coming in to pay off our debt, our massive debt that Wes just talked about, and to continue to help us to have a positive GDP. So, you know, that's just something to realize, that the left and the right are going to fight over immigration. They're not going to tell you why they're really fighting over it. You know, on the right, it's unfair to the US citizens. On the left, it's unkind to not let them come in. But the reality is there's economic reasons that drive political decisions that they're not really telling us or talking too much about. So that's the only thing I think I'm going to say about politics. Again, I would encourage you, if you want to take a screenshot of this, but essentially the recession signal of GDP, again, that's growth. The statements have been GDP is not recessionary yet because it's still positive. Again, the estimates of the government is that it's going to come down. So the government's estimate, based upon their last data that they published, the CBO and the Fed estimate that GDP is going to end up about 1.3 to 2.2% this year. However, the CBO says they believe that we possibly will have a recession and that number could be much lower. They do also estimate that through 2028 to 2034, our real GDP is only going to be between 1.8 and 2%. So that means they see much slower growth in the next decade, and I do too, than what we saw in the last decade. And even that small amount of growth of 1.8 to 2%, which is why they need inflation to be less than 2, relies on a huge surge of immigration. And they say that in their documents. Manufacturing is in a recession. Corporate profits and layoffs are going up. And 40% of American CEOs say they plan layoffs in the next year. 50% plan a hiring freeze. We are also starting to see profit misses in the stock market and downward revisions. We've already talked about the stretched consumer. These are two really important numbers that you never hear that I just want to just put on your radar. One thing is gross domestic income. So historically, our Keynesian economists have always looked at two numbers, GDP and GDI. And GDP is the sales that are generated by the country, government, private, public sector, people, households. GDI is the amount of income that's created by those sales. Theoretically, they should be equal. If one person buys something, it's profit to another person, right? Right now, there is a gap between the published GDP and GDI of the country. It's a 4% gap. It's the largest in history, right? So something is off in the data that says we have positive growth in the country, yet it's not flowing through into incomes. It's a strong recession indicator when GDP is up and GDP is down. It's only happened twice, once before the Great Depression in 1920s and once before World War II. So it's just a number that makes me nervous. What's interesting is most of the economists, I think there are 785 economists in the government right now, they're 50-1 Democrat to Republican and modern monetary theorists. And what modern monetary theory means is that the government can spend as much money as you want. They don't need to balance a budget. They just continue to go into debt because they're funding themselves with money printing, that it'll never create inflation. And so they don't ever have to worry about paying it off. And that's been the leading economic theory for the last decade or so, maybe even prior to about 2009, won a Nobel Peace Prize for it, the woman who coined the term. And it's what most of the central bankers of the world are going on. Well, this big inflation surge showed that modern monetary theory doesn't really work. You can have mass money printing and it can create mass inflation. And so it's just something that definitely has me worried, that, you know, these old dog economists that are very wise, who've lived through the 70s and 80s and all these other crises, are going, this is a big problem. But the current younger economists don't understand it, don't even look at it. The other thing is net national savings. Net national savings is negative for the third time in history at 2.9%. And this means, again, as a country, we have been saving less money, and it's the savings of the government and of public and private sector and as households. And it's only been this negative 2 times in history, right before the great financial crisis and right before the COVID recessions. So it's not a good sign that those things are so negative and that the debt continues to grow and that households continue to be stretched. And then the last thing is, again, we talked about deflationary demographics. We're producing 1.6 kids per woman in the US, which is the lowest ever. And we need at least 2.1 children to produce, spend, and tax for our future liabilities. The other thing is 30 million boomers are retiring in the next 5 years. They will be spending less, they will cost more, and only 24% of them actually have pensions. And so, you know, it's going to be more on the government to pay for their Medicare and Social Security, which is why there's such an argument right now on the left and the right as to what do we do with Social Security when in 5 years we may not even be able to fund what we've committed to these retiring boomers. Okay, this is also an important slide. We talked about the longer and the shorter leading economic indicators. They're the things that start to go negative before we technically get into a recession. And what you'll see if you look at the bottom slide, I want you to look at the gray bars and the red line. The gray bars are prior recessions, and the red line is when you've crossed over recessionary indicator for the leading economic indicators. So when you combine all the leading economic indicators into a composite, you'll see that they start to fall together. And then at some point during that fall, you're in a recession, and then they start to rise again. And what you'll see is that from 2022 through March 2024, these leading economic indicators were all well below that recessionary line. It was warning that we are in a recession or it's coming. And they have teetered right at that line since March 2024. So yes, technically a recession hasn't been declared, but my question is why? Okay, they're continuing to be downward, but they're just staying barely above board. Manufacturing recession is here. I'm sorry, I went one too far. I want you to understand what the conference board said in their published report in April of 2024, despite what they said on the news. The leading economic 6-month annual growth rates remain negative, but a pace of contraction has slowed. Overall, the index points to a fragile, if even not recessionary outlook for the U.S. economy. Indeed, rising consumer debt, inflated interest rates, and persistent inflation pressures continue to pose risk to the economic activity of 2024. That is the reality, regardless of what the headline news says, the Fed says, et cetera. The other thing I want you to see, just to drive this home, that we are heading into a more contractionary space. If you look at the left, this is the Conference Board's leading economic index. You'll see the number of months between the peak and a recession in prior cycles. The prior recessions back to 1959, from peak to recession took 1 month, 7 months, 8 months, 14, 16, 10, and 20, 9 months in 2020. We are currently, actually, this says 27 months, but now it's 33 months past the peak, and we still haven't been technically declared to be in a recession. If you look at the right-hand side, you'll see the moving 6 months average of the 6 months rate of change of the leading economic indicators, and every single time it's been down in red, with the exception of a very minor blip between 65 and 70, very minor between, before 2000. When it's red, you're in a recession, and we've been there, for quite some time. So this is just more real data that you're not going to see on the headlines. It tells us we're heading toward a deeper contraction at some point. The coincident indicators are those real-time indicators that tell you, are we in a recession now? And real time, we have teetered recessionary, but we just bounced back. And so we haven't really gone negative in the real time as a total composite. However, this is a big number that economists look at. There's something called the LEI to CEI ratio, and that is the leading economic indicators compared to the coincident indicators, and they're really heading downward. And you'll see that every time this blue line on the right goes down, we end up in a recession. And you can see how far down we've gone, and we're still technically haven't been declared to be in a recession, but we're heading that direction, and I think that's the key. Okay, other recession signals. Wendy, I'm looking at my time here real quick. Okay. Other recession signals are the yield curve, the money supply. The money supply has only gone negative 4 times in history. When money is not being pumped into the system, it's very difficult for there to be growth. We have the highest money supply contraction ever in history. And this is a recession signal. So most likely we're still heading toward recession. The other thing that is a signal is what's happening in the banking system. So I don't have time to go into it today, but I will just say that heads of the IMF, head economists, former FDIC president, former Fed governors have said we have a category 4 to 5 risk of a commercial banking crisis. They expect about 500 banks to have to fall to be merged over the next 2 years, which was more than what fell in 2009 to 2012. If banks start to fail, and it will come out as mergers, they don't want to let you know banks are failing. But if you start to see a lot of bank mergers, credit is going to tighten even more, especially if we're in a recession. And that means it's going to be harder to get loans from small to regional banks. So that's a big black swan that has yet to drop that we just need to be aware of. Okay. So what does all this mean? I think GDP is going to continue to get lower. Feel free to take a screenshot of this as well, especially as demographics continue to decline, but immigration may offset it. Unemployment will go higher. It always does, but not till after the first rate cut. Inflation in the short term is coming down. We've seen that. However, over the long term, because of our demographic decline, which means less workers, higher wage inflation, and all of the US debt we have, the reshoring that we're doing to bring back onshore a lot of things like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, and having to redo a lot of our nation's bridges and infrastructure and electric grids, those are very, very costly, and it requires the government to go into more debt. If they do, that will create longer term inflation, which will result in higher US interest rates. I believe we're going to have a stagnating economy, more like stagflation over the next 10 years. Jamie Dimon agrees with me that that's a very big risk, the head of Chase. What that means is you have low growth at the same time that you have higher inflation. And that can just mean stagnation, which means it's going to be harder to make returns than it was the last 10 years. So don't beat yourself up that it's going to take more work and be harder. It doesn't mean that there's not opportunity. We've been in a 40-year secular decline, yet we've still made a lot of wealth in these small cycles of recession, expansion, peak, and contraction. So don't give up and say, oh, this is fatalistic. It's easy to do that if we worry. We need to say, okay, these things are probably coming. Now, how do we prepare ourselves to grow, to preserve what we have, take the right kind of risks at the right time, and not fall backwards? I think we're going to be declared in a recession before long. It won't happen during the election. I think that regardless of who gets in office, that Congress is going to have to cut spending and raise taxes. When governments get into the amount of debt that we were talking about, Wes, and it's trillions and trillions of dollars, they only really have 3 choices to not fail as a government and not have mass inflation. And that is to cut spending, raise taxes, and allow more inflation. Because if they allow more inflation without telling you that they're allowing it, then they pay off their debts with money that makes their current debts worth less in the future than it is today. So I think we're going to have likely a recession and then stagflation, hoping to prevent hyperinflation. I want to just give you these 2 last slides, Wendy, and then we will stop. Investing in recessionary cycles. I want you to just take a screenshot. I've given you what historically has done well between stocks, bonds, commodities, metals, and real estate. This doesn't mean that it will do well in the future. So this is not investment advice, but it at least gives you some history to think about. But for real estate, single family values tend to fall during a recession as people cannot afford a home. Rents are generally stable if you buy good properties in a good area. This is a time during recession to buy cheap properties from motivated and distressed sellers. Being good to them and creating win-wins is really important, but it's very difficult to time values and flip properties. You got to have multiple exit strategies if you're flipping, buy, hold, sell to a retail investor, sell to an investor. But you really need to focus on buying in good quality areas. don't be buying your C-D properties at recessionary times. You need to buy properties in a low expense, low tax, low crime, low insurance area, and in an area with better GDP than the national average, because some states and cities will do better than the country as a whole, but you need to expect higher vacancies and delinquencies. You must have more reserves. Don't be putting every penny into the biggest property you can have. You need some reserves to weather these up and downs, but it's a significant opportunity to buy and hold until the expansion allows for you to exit at a profit, the next expansion. And you want to lock in your rates as long as possible. Investing during wartime, I wish I didn't have to say this, but very similar to the way you would invest in real estate in a recession, except you really want to avoid areas like Killeen, Texas, or high military areas, because you will have significant vacancy during that time. And unfortunately, I think we do have an increasing probability of a greater war than what we're dealing with today. Stagflationary cycles, this is really my base case for where we're going to be longer term. And generally speaking, stocks, have done fairly well, not great, average 2.5% inflation adjusted returns. Bonds may do well. Commodities do well. Metals do well, and real estate, again, you want to buy and hold and be very cautious on flipping and buy properties in really good areas with strong growth, like the Texas Triangle, like Raleigh, Durham, et cetera. And then the last slide here, and I think I'm going to finish just on time, is just some biblical wisdom for all times, and things that I think we need to remind ourselves as we patiently await for our economy to hopefully do better at some point. Is, the rich in this age, we need to be charged not to be haughty, not to pat ourselves on the back of how well we've done, and not to set our hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides everything we need to enjoy. We need to seek him first, pray for wisdom, who generously gives all without fault. It will be given. He doesn't promise us riches, but he promises if we pray for wisdom, he'll give it to us. And then 2 Corinthians 9:8 is, God is able to make all grace abound to you. So having all sufficiency in all things and at all times, you may abound in every good work. And so the last one, there's so many good ones here, but just, commit our work to the Lord, plan diligently, don't be hasty. It says the plans of the diligence lead surely to abundance, but everyone who's hasty comes only to poverty. And I think that wraps up well, Tom's message on being patient. We need to be patient. We need to watch. We need to pray for wisdom, and just prayerfully ask God to help us to make the best decisions and protect us from ourselves and our poor decisions that we don't know. And he is faithful to slam those doors when we ask him to do it, and to open wide the doors where he wants us to go. And I'm just so thankful for his grace in, blessing us far better and beyond what we could ever ask or imagine, even in really, really difficult times. So, and Wendy, I'll end with that.
Wow. So see what I mean? Don't you feel like your hair is blowing backwards and your lips are going crazy and wow, that. Okay, does anybody have any questions? If you do, you can unmute yourself and we can talk.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Bryan.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understood her, Anna, correctly. I think she said
Could you
buy
repeat
cheap.
all of that? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, my head's gonna explode as it is. Great information, and thank you for sharing all that.
You're welcome.
Did I hear you say buy cheap, but then you said buy in good areas?
Yes, both if you can.
Help me.
Relatively good areas. The reality is, when you invest in C- and D areas, ask me how I know. It looks good on paper, but it never works out that way. And I had to make a decision for myself, especially as a believer who grew up in poverty. I grew up in Section 8 housing. I did a lot of inner city youth ministry with people that were even much poorer than I am. And you realize that the challenges of people in that condition are very, very difficult for them to get out of. And so as a business plan, you will not be able to provide enough income for your family investing in those areas, because your business plan is reliable on the financial stewardship of people that just don't have good financial stewardship. So I had to kind of separate my investing from my giving, right? Me investing in higher quality areas that allow my profits to be and my income that I support my family on and missionaries, et cetera, on, it has to be reliable. And so I need to be in stable income areas. Then I can choose to say, okay, now with this money that I have, I'm going to go back and invest in and be on boards of inner city youth ministries and help them come up and help them to do better or whatnot. So sometimes it is wiser to invest in better areas and then give your philanthropy to the causes that are going to help rise up those that are living in poorer areas. But it's very difficult to make any profits in properties that
Oh,
are in tough
I don't
areas
know
because
if you
they're
can
not
hear
going
me.
to
I
go up
lost
in
you.
value.
I lost
I'm
the,
sorry.
Yeah, we can hear her and we can hear you, Bryan.
Yeah. But invest in the best areas that you can and if you buy a low price property in a good area, you're going to tend to do much better than a low price property in a bad area.
Awesome. You know what I thought was interesting too is you mentioned about investing in during wartime in cities that have a lot of bases. I mean, investing in a city that has a base is always great, but I never really thought about that. When they get deployed, their families tend to move back home, move in with
Yes.
relatives and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Does anybody else have any questions? I know everybody wants your slides. Everybody's asking. Lou, you've unmuted yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you talk about the commodities you said possibly people should invest in? I know you're not giving advice, but I couldn't see the slide on my phone, so I was just curious if you could
Sure.
talk a little bit
You know, the
about that.
thing
Thank you.
about Sure, sure. The thing about commodities is they are much more volatile in their prices and their values. They just are than real estate is. So I'm not a huge commodity investor. Commodities are anything like oil, gas, gold, silver, etc. I can tell you that historically, I bought very little gold and silver. You know, I had friends that were like doomers, you know, since 2009 that were like piling up on tons because they just thought we're imminently going to collapse and we've made it another, 15 years or whatever. But with all of the volatility and the things coming, especially the US national debt, that generally speaking, governments allow more inflation, which devalues their currency in order to get out of massive debt. So I do think we're heading there and that's a risk. So one of the things I like to personally invest in, which I never invested in until the last couple of years, is gold and silver. And gold has gone up significantly, and so has silver as a result of all of this uncertainty and volatility. And so I'm bullish on the values going up. However, my investment in gold and silver is not so much because I think it's going to go up in value always, but because it's like an insurance policy against bigger economic collapse or times of war, when historically, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but other countries have shut down businesses, kind of like we did during COVID, right? Or they make you stop working and they start producing things for the war effort. You have inflation, your value, you have mass inflation like other countries where people become very poor very quickly. And so gold and silver to me is more of an insurance policy because they've been a store of wealth forever and historically. And central banks are buying up a lot, which tells you a lot. We've got risks of, the dollar losing its world reserve currency as the BRICS nations rise up, and the thought that there might be another currency backed by gold again. So I'm bullish on gold or silver, but it could also go down during expansion periods too. So it's not something you buy to say, it's always going to go up in value, but it's something that you buy kind of for protection. So that's the only one I feel really good about, talking about, because oil, gas, I mean, I'm invested in some of those things passively, but they're very, very volatile depending on the markets. I like real estate. I'm still bullish on real estate. People need a place to live, right?
Follow up, any other industries other than real estate that you think will do well during the cycle?
It's really hard to say, but generally these things always have hope and they create big market rallies and big booms for a bit. And it's hard to tell whether these things are here to stay, which companies are going to do well versus which ones are going to fall to the wayside. But things like healthcare and AI. You know, people are banking, the market has basically been held afloat and up by hopes for AI and all the new wonder drugs. And then another company comes out, creates a new wonder drug, and the other ones fall. Or a NVIDIA competitor comes out and NVIDIA falls. So it's hard to necessarily pick the right companies. So I definitely won't give stock advice there. But I think generally speaking, companies are going to need to have more technology to create some more growth, but that also causes some, workers to be laid off. And I think healthcare and tech tend to do really, really well in all times because they're constantly growing. But then there's pockets of that don't. But essentially, things that are necessary. I always think, is this a necessary thing or service, or is this a discretionary thing or service? So I would generally broadly say invest in things that people need. They need, their health. They need to take care of their health. They need to provide, education for their children. They need homes. They need housing, and they need food. Obviously. I mean, if I were a farmer, I'd be like Wendy, and I'd have more farm animals. I'd grow gardens. I'd have businesses related to that stuff. But it's not my forte. I have no skill set there. But farmland tends to do well, as well over the long term. But invest in businesses that provide a need rather than businesses that provides discretionary stuff like getting my nails done. If I am struggling check to check, I'm going to start painting my own fingernails instead of going to the salon to get them done. So that's just an example of how I'm thinking, especially if we have a continuing struggling economy over the next several years.
Thank you.
You're
Awesome.
welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. I see you have your hand up.
Hey guys, Wendy, thank you. Bryan, Tom, thank you all for another great morning. What I wanted to ask is, Anna, where do you think the difference is in interpretations between what we're saying and talking about here and what the consumers and other business owners may be seeing? Where is it not matching?
The consumers and small businesses feel that they're in a personal recession. They're in a business recession, regardless of what the media says. So they're continuing to pull back. The reality is most people don't dig into data. They're just surviving. They're not looking at economic data. They're just hopeful that things are better soon. But the reality is small businesses there's an uptick in business closures. There's personal households that are pulling back because they can't spend anymore. So I don't think most of them are looking at economic data. I know I never did, until I became an investor. And so there's a huge disconnect. That's why I call it a silent recession. But what does happen generally is as there's bigger wealth gaps between the wealthy and the not wealthy, as the middle class shrinks and the lower income bucket grows, typically you start to have a lot of polarization, more political polarization, just like we're seeing now, a lot more fighting about, the rich against the poor, the corporate the landlords were all greedy, CEOs were all greedy, it becomes a fight between the haves and the have-nots in many, many ways. And so I think you have a lot of risk. We're seeing those things happening, and you have a lot of risk of more internal fighting and more polarization, but they're not really looking at the data. The news headlines are going to skew the data in whichever way, this is unfortunate, is going to help their party. So I'm going to go there, right? Because I actually like to listen to like financial news from all three major networks, although I get most of my data from actual economists, not from the news. And MSNBC is going to have a positive spin on the economy. And if you have a negative, they say you're a MAGA doomer. Fox News is going to show you the negative of the data. And if you're positive, they're going to say you're a liberal. CNN's become a little more balanced where they were pretty liberal before. And so, depending on which media channel the average American listens to, they're going to have a completely different perspective. And that's why there's all this political fighting, that you're an idiot and you don't know anything because their news channel told them this. And the reality is the real economic data points the picture that there is. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're looking at it from a political standpoint. So it's important to watch economists, and look at news sources that really tell you the details of the data, not biased opinion pieces about where the economy is.
Thank you, Bryn. By the way, I don't have farm animals, but I have a backyard full of iguanas. I was going to offer that to John Morey. I know that, that's his interest.
He knows me very well. He sure
Yeah.
does.
That's awesome. Anybody else have any questions at all? This has been, I mean, there's still 86 people on this call and we're way
Well, thank
late.
y'all for hanging with me.
This is awesome. This is awesome.
I
It's
do
like
have a
nobody
question.
wants to go. Go ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Tony.
and again, thank you for all your information. You're awesome. But
Yeah.
so looking at small multifamily commercial, usually their terms last about 5-10 years, depending on the terms they got. In 2021, rates were the lowest ever, or at least for a while. Now, the 5-year mark of that is coming in 2026.
Mhm.
Is that something that you're keeping an eye on as far as like landlords that didn't keep up with rent, going up and whatnot? And I'm thinking they will be in trouble if they didn't, because their interest rate's about to double pretty much. Is that
Yeah.
something that you're keeping an eye out for? That we should keep an eye out for?
Absolutely 100%. So a lot of the loans that people took on, I'm going to say, I'm not going to talk about retail, industrial. I'm just going to talk about multifamily.
Right.
Okay. The smaller multifamily properties, I'm going to say $1 million properties or lower, maybe even a few $1 million properties, are mostly funded by local and regional banks. And those banks generally lock rates for 5 years. There are a few over the last couple of years that locked for 7 to 10. But generally speaking, they locked for 5 because most people didn't think that they needed to lock any longer because rates had always been low. So a lot of those rates will not come up for renewal until 2025, 2026. And so during that time, depending on where rates are at that time, and I tend to think they're going to start falling, maybe not as low as they were before, you will start to have people have to refinance their properties if rates stay around where they are now. And when I say rates, it's an important distinction that commercial rates are usually based on short-term rates, the prime or the SOFR, not long-term rates like the residential properties that we were talking about. So if you get a commercial loan, which you can get on a single family house up to up to anything, if you get a commercial loan, then your interest rates are going to be lower than they are for you guys that are buying, single family homes with a residential loan. So rates could fall, and that could keep the fallout and the number of distressed sellers actually lower than some people think. But on bigger properties where they went with like bridge debt or semi-short-term debt, or they went to a bank, but they've got, they've got a loan that only actually lasts for 10 years, because a lot of the small lenders didn't give you 20, 30-year loans, they're 10. They are going to be in distress. And if values are still down, especially multifamily commercial values because of the cap rates, if values are down, they're going to have to cash in. So there's definitely going to be more distress. You just have to be careful going in, and you have to have a lot of reserves, because as these properties get in distress, you're going to have to put a lot more money down to buy these properties if we're in a recession, even though there's distress, which is part of why you prepare now, right? Hopefully you've got some cash on the sidelines, you've sold some properties before values start to come down, and you're able to capitalize on those deals. But again, I haven't done a large multifamily deal. We closed our last one December 31st of 2023. So it's been a patience game for me, because none of them have been good enough. So you just have to watch for the right properties in the right markets when those opportunities come, and they will, and be prepared to pounce on them. But make sure you're investing in really good areas. That's the key. Don't go chasing yield like so many of these that are failing did in tertiary markets that don't have any growth, that may struggle during a recession.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Awesome.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Anyone else? All right. I'm telling you, Anna, this was amazing. So
Thank you.
everybody's asking about slides. Are you
I'm
willing?
happy to share them. Just promise you will not share them with anyone else. I charged people $100 for a 3-hour discussion of these slides, and I'm happy for you to share, but just don't share with anyone else, because I don't want anyone else getting this and taking it as financial advice and telling them what I'm telling them to invest in, especially the last ones that tell you what has done well that's beyond real estate. So happy to
Awesome.
share. Maybe I'll send a
Awesome.
link with a link to my drive or something like that, Wendy.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I want everyone to know that you can watch a replay of this instantly on several different Facebook pages. It's been shared. Of course, it's on Sonrisers. It's on my personal Facebook, and it's on Dealmaker. It's on Wendell Long shared it on his. There's several people that the Power Hour, I think, it's on there as well. So the Women's Power Hour, I should say. So there's several ways you can watch it immediately. It will also be uploaded on our YouTube page for Sonrisers on Monday, because it takes a while. We're in Rock Hill. It takes a while to download stuff and then upload. It's crazy. But anyway, this has been absolutely amazing. I hope, Anna, that you will also get to see all the messages that have come across all the Facebook pages too. Tom Berry is even chomping at the bit. We need to get him in here too. This has
Awesome.
been
Awesome.
it's been really, really just incredible, mind-blowing, wonderful, and we're really, really grateful that you're willing to share your knowledge with us. Thank you. And I think
You're
it's
welcome.
important too that people don't see this as doom and gloom. That's not what this is.
Right. Right. It's not. I mean, listen, we've been on, there's been doomers and gloomers for years. And if I had listened to all of that in 2009, when my world was falling apart, I mean, I worked at AIG. I was losing my job. My 401k was wiped out. My husband's business was struggling, and I found out I was pregnant all in the same time. Like, if I had listened to everybody else, I never would have invested in another piece of real estate. I would have been too scared. But I knew cycles only last for a while. And
Right.
all that was going well was my tenants were paying rent. And so I knew I had to buy more real estate. And I thank God for it, because that hardest year of my life, one of the hardest years of my life, is what actually allowed me to create tremendous wealth over the next decade, because I wasn't afraid to run in when everybody was running out, because I knew people need a place to live. So that's why I say these things they are gloomy for a lot of households. People will struggle, but as an investor, if you can have the wherewithal and the knowledge to know that these are short-lived, and I have a window of opportunity to make tremendous wealth for my family over the next decade by buying the right properties and holding them, then that should be a positive thing for you. You should say, great, now that I know that things are coming down, I have an opportunity to buy cheap, to get good long-term rates, and to then grow in good markets. That's the takeaway, is invest wisely, buy more property, buy them in good markets, buy them as cheaply as you can with the best loans that you can, locked in as long as you can, and you will do well. It's not a guarantee of growing wealth, but it's going to put you in a much better position than the rest of the country might be in, because they don't know what to do when these things happen. So I hope that it's encouraging to you, not discouraging to you.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been terrific. Thank you, Bryan, for sharing. Tom, are you ready to close us, my friend?
Excuse me. I am. Thank you so much, Anna. I mean, I know Wendy always says like drinking from a fire hydrant, but this may be as much as drinking from the Mississippi River. God bless you with all your knowledge and your kindness and ability to share. It was wonderful for us.
Thank you, Tom.
Let's pray. Holy righteous God, Father, this shows, within your people how you give us the talent to have knowledge and be able to share it. And Father, as we walk along with you, having knowledge and light as to how things are and where we can go and how we can bless you and glorify you is all, Father, in good taste. So we thank you for this morning. We thank you for all who have spoken and all who have been on this call. We praise you, Father, in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. And remember the one thing, I mean, we learned so much, like it's just amazing. But remember, the last two words here are but God.
Amen.
That's the bottom line. Thank you all for being here, and I can't wait to see you next week. Thanks so much.